Hello and welcome to ConTinual, the convention that's here whenever you want us. My name is Jean Marie Ward, and tonight the topic is unicorns and other fantastic creatures. With us are six wonderful authors who all use these amazing animals in their work. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their work, starting with Barbara Ann Wright. Barbara Ann?
Hi there. I'm a writer and editor for Bold Strokes Books. My 16th book, The Mage and the Monster, the last in the Sisters of Sarah's trilogy, comes out this October.
Great. Jay?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jay Requard. I'm a author of epic fantasy and sword and sorcery. I'm also the host of the YouTube show Pondering the Orb. My most recent release is A Wave of Lions by Falstaff Books. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. Paige?
I'm Paige L. Christie, and I'm the author of Legacies of Arnon Fantasy series and several short stories, the latest of which came out yesterday, in fact, in the JordanCon 2022 anthology. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Oh, congratulations and happy book birthday. David, what about you?
I'm David R. Slayton. I'm the author of the Adam Binder Urban Fantasy series, the first of which is White Trash Warlock. The other and the other books are available from Blackstone in audio, ebook, and paperback. I also next year have my first epic fantasy, Last Son of the Night, coming out, as well as a spinoff to the Adam Binder Warlock series called Rogue Community College. And I'm excited to announce that I just finished a gay, geeky rom-com called To Catch a Geek that'll be coming out from Crazy Maple next year as well.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, great. Wendy?
Hi, I'm Wendy Van Camp. I'm a poet, an author, an illustrator, and an editor. My latest book is just behind me. It's called Eccentric Orbits. It's an anthology of speculative poetry. And speculative, of course, is science fiction, fantasy with fantastical beasts and creatures, and horror. So hope you'll check out Eccentric Orbits.
Mm-hmm. Well, some horror creatures are pretty fantastic, that's for sure. Gini, what about you?
Hi, I'm Gini Koch. I write the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series for Dog Books. I also write under a variety of other pen names and in all lengths and all genres. And in many of those, I have a lot of fantastical creatures, some that you recognize and some that I've just made up.
Mm-hmm. So, what sort of creatures are you talking about here? Give us the bestiary a bit.
Is that me?
Yep, and where folks can find it in your work, which...
Okay. Well, in the Alien series, I have a variety of fantastical little beasties. All of them are alien animals. Everybody's favorites are the poofs. They are small, fluffy bundles of cuteness that have big black button eyes, and their fur's so fluffy you can't see their ears, their tails, or their paws. But when roused, they go over 6 feet tall and they're just a mouthful of teeth. And they're carnivores, and they eat a lot of problems that solves and sometimes creates problems for my main characters. I also have a variety of other alien animals, peregrines, which look like peacocks on steroids, ocelars, which are caracal fox cats, chochos, which are, pig dogs, and so forth. So there's lots of alien animals, almost all of which I created, or, based off of other things. I mean, I could go on for an hour about those. But in my Necropolis Enforcement Files series, which is set mostly on the undead plane, there I use a lot of fantastical creatures, including, pick a monster, angels, demons, dragons, werewolves, vampires, liches, white worms, you name it. It's in there, and if it isn't in there yet, it will be in there in the future. And then just all the way through. I like the beasties in all their forms, whether there are human beasties that, like werewolves that are changing, or whether they are just animals with extra special abilities. I just think they're really fun to write and really fun to have in your repertoire.
Okay, Wendy.
Well, I think one of my favorite fantastical creatures has to be the dragon. I was born in the year of the dragon. I've been known to collect dragon jewelry through the years. And I'm really fascinated with them as characters because there's quite a difference between the Eastern dragons in the Orient and the Western dragons in Europe. The Eastern dragons are they usually just are like snakes, more like, and they're very powerful gods. They're very wise. They can be very destructive, but in ways that are more natural. Others are Western dragons, of course, that have the wings, and they're more foil for our heroes to go out and kill. And of course, they love to collect those treasures. But I've also been influenced by Annie McCaffrey's dragons. And I kind of taken a little license of writing fire lizards here and there in my stories. I love the little baby tiny dragons that become companions. Now mine are not, of course, fur dragons. They're my own with their own characteristics. But I certainly do pay some homage to Annie McCaffrey and speaking of unicorns, I actually enjoy writing about unicorns too. There's symbols of purity. They can be elusive in the background. They make really wonderful characters to be in forests and to pick them upon. And they can be a triple unit in stories too. So I think I know a lot of people think unicorns are not as popular, but anytime I talk to a fantasy reader, unicorns always come up. So I think they're still a very popular creature.
Mm-hmm. Do you use them as a metaphor in your works, or do you use them as characters?
In my poetry, they're more metaphors. But in my short stories, they are definitely creatures and characters.
Paige, you said that you do a lot of work with dragons too.
Yes,
So
I
tell
do.
us about the creatures in your world.
Well, my dragons are not, they're more Western based dragons, but they do not breathe fire as most classic fantasy dragons do. They control the weather. So that's my twist on them, that the heat they bring affects everybody. So they have the ability to control the weather, and that affects pretty much everything that happens in the story. Thus, the name of the first book is Dragon Weather. I've always been a dragon fan. They are my go-to fantasy creature in one version or another. I think there's just so many possibilities with them. As a lot of people use them as mounts, some people use them as foes, some people use them as friends. There's just an endless twist you can place on a dragon and their influence on the story, and I find it fascinating to play with that idea. I'm also a big fan of lake monsters because I grew up in New England and we got to have Champy. I did not have Nessie, but I had Champy. So I'm a big lake monster fan. The Ogobogo is one of my favorites out in the Pacific Northwest. And I'm a big fan of any horse adjacent creature. Valdemar's companions, the mounts in R.J. Barker's The Wounded Kingdom series, which are more like elk with saber-toothed tiger fangs and claws. They're super cool. I really like those too. So anything kind of horse adjacent. And again, unicorns, fell in love with The Last Unicorn. And since I got on this panel, I've had the America song stuck in my head. So
Horse with no name,
guys. No, The Last Unicorn.
Oh,
they did the soundtrack for the
movie, I didn't realize
that.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's an earworm, so thank you.
Not my fault, not my fault. I didn't come up with this panel title. Anyway, David, what about you? What about the creatures in your work?
Well, it's funny because while I write epic fantasy, I mostly write urban fantasy, and I use a lot more creatures in the urban. I really like to take something that you think you know and play around with it, kind of like what Paige was saying. I really enjoy using a trope or a creature and making something new or different about it. I think the thing that people get surprised the most about in White Trash Warlock is the Elven Queen is very fond of classic cars, and she likes to steal them. And unfortunately, she got into a tussle with a dragon here in Denver who stole her favorite Spitfire convertible, and that conflict definitely is going to be a factor in the book. So I love the idea that a dragon might hoard whatever we consider valuable now. Like, so they might, not be hoarding gold and jewels, they might be hoarding cars or iPhones, right? So I really like putting new spins on things that you might think are dangerous, and things maybe they'll surprise you. In Rogue Community College, the spinoff, one of the big themes at the school is trying to discern what is a threat and what is not a threat based upon either what you think you know about that fantastic beast or its appearance, right? Maybe, for example, there's a female Saurian and she's 8 foot tall and she paints her nails pink, and everyone's terrified of her until she opens her mouth and is extremely, girly and friendly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that would be, yes. It's amazing how even in real life, the scariest things are not necessarily the most dangerous. As I was mentioning in another panel, last night we discovered a tiger wolf spider in our bathtub just as I was about to get in for a shower. They are 3 inches across. They are huge monsters. And so after I did my little squeak, my husband and I, took the thing out. He got me one of a Tupperware container. I threw it on top of the spider, slid a cardboard under it, brought it outside. Well, today find out people keep those things as pets because they are not aggressive at all. I was terrified of this monster spider, and it wasn't nearly as dangerous as a black widow that would be maybe 3/4 of an inch. So yeah, go figure. 8-foot saurons with pink nail polish. I'm good with that. Barbara Ann, what about you? What are the sorts of creatures you use in your work?
I like things that transform, not necessarily like werewolves and stuff, but like people who are part monster. In the Period East Day Adventures books, I have my royal family has fiends hidden inside them. It's the source of their power, the secret source of their power, and they get let out by strong emotion, and it transforms kind of the way they look, and then their personality becomes monstrous. I've used dragons in Not Your Average Love Spell, but they're more like Bigfoots in that one, and that some people believe in them, some people don't. And when you find footprints in the woods, it's like, well, did a dragon make it or somebody with a big plastic foot? And of course, I've written Greek mythology in coils, and there are just so many, many, many creatures to draw on in there. My favorite probably being taking things like manticores or harpies and making them comedic has been one of my favorite things to do.
Well, a lot of people have made a lot of comedy about harpies, but usually they are not part bird. But anyway, have you, in working in Greek mythology, have you read Adrian Meyer's work on how many of the monsters, specifically the griffin, were derived, and the cyclops were derived from misinterpretation of fossils discovered during the pre-classical period?
I haven't read that one specifically, but I have heard the whole elephant skull cyclops thing before.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, she used there's a red figure vase, I believe, where the griffin is depicted by what is very obviously a pterodon skull.
Ah.
And so, yeah, it's fascinating stuff on potential origins of fantastical creatures. Personally, I think that the unicorn derives from a rhinoceros, but I could be wrong. Jay, what about you? What fantastical creatures do you use in your work?
So most of my epic fantasy and sword and sorcery features some sort of creature, especially sword and sorcery from the vein of Robert E. Howard or Conan the Barbarian, a lot of those stories kind of featured these kind of eldritch creatures that were kind of usually half man and half, lobster or something like that. So I used a half man, half lobster in my recent series, a Wave of Lions, which is kind of used as a representation of the naturalistic world's terror. Like we have this idea in our head that nature is kind of fluffy and kind, and sometimes nature isn't. And the monster that I set the pirate crew of that story up against is basically brutality personified. And I looked a lot into like lobsters became a big thing on the internet for a little bit, so I kind of used lobsters because it was a pop culture thing at the moment. Kind of a little tongue-in-cheek jab. But the fun thing too is that I got to use like sirens, so like half mermaid, half women that kind of sing men to their demise. I was really lucky to be able to kind of turn that trope on its side and actually use it in a very different way. But in terms of dragons, I've always been a big fan of Le Guin's dragons from Earthsea, where they're actually kind of manifestations, a natural part of the world in the universe there. So a lot of the dragons I use kind of come out of being these semi-divine creatures that, represent nature, but they're also they have this kind of weird history where they have a little bit of genetic, I call it cousinship with humans in a way. I think one thing that makes fantastical creatures interesting in our genre of fantasy, especially, is that, when we look back at mythology and just human history, we only really account for the last 10,000 years of our human existence, where humans have been around for 300,000 years. And there are so many creatures, especially mammals, that have been killed off or made extinct from climate change, human consumption, all sorts of things. So I think when we talk about these fantastic creatures, it's always kind of a wonderful, I think, throwback to something in our cultural memory. Like we remember dragons because there was probably some sort of creature in our background that, we labeled dragons or something. You could just look at all sorts of things, manticores especially, the Loch Ness monster. All of these prehistoric creatures could have been something that maybe weren't existent during the time that humans started walking around, but we had some sort of memory from our just ancient past about it. And I think that's what we continue with these stories. Sorry, that was a weird tangent.
That's quite all right.
If I can, though, I think that's an amazing tangent because Jay and I both share a love of history. And, like the ancient Greeks, they found dinosaur fossils and they found megalodons.
Yes.
And they had reasons to think, okay, there is a natural record to support their myths. So, yeah, I think it's a brilliant tangent. So thank you for going there.
Yeah, and I go ahead.
Marie, I was going to say the Arabian oryx is, I believe, is what's considered the unicorn because of the way the horns go. You see them in profile; they look like one horn.
Right.
And so they, more than a rhino, they're what's considered the basis of the unicorn myth.
Oh, I think all of these myths could have multiple bases, actually, because when people were looking for unicorn horns, the ones they picked were narwhal horns. They didn't pick the oryx. But yeah, I can see the oryx doing it. And I've also read to the effect of that the dragon is in fact Asian crocodiles that formerly got to very large size and had a sympathy with the weather, because the dragon, if you look at the cosmology, you've got the four animals of the four quadrants, and the dragon is the east where the rain comes from. And crocodiles in Asia apparently have a sympathy with, they kind of know when it's about to rain. A lot of animals do, actually. Cats and dogs are famous for predicting earthquakes. But yeah, I mean, there does seem to be some kind of basis for almost all of our myths. We just can't necessarily see it because we're so far away from it. So yeah, no, I think it's a great tangent. One thing I know that your background includes history and religious studies, Jay. Does that affect how you depict your monsters or your
Uh,
creature?
So I'm working on a urban fantasy trilogy for Falstaff Books right now that kind of deals with this question about the origination of so okay. Um get ready, kids. Um so with a lot of the stuff that's going on right now in quantum mechanics and quantum theory, especially the ideas around time and how time works, um from a religious studies perspective, it brings in a lot of interesting questions about the Bible from a temporal aspect, especially like the Judaic Bible, which is a Bible's just a big term for a bunch of Judeo-Christian texts. Um, but one thing that I've been working on is this idea that if you had the Garden of Eden at some point and it contained all of these kind of mythical creatures, and then of course there was a flood, and there's of course some scripture in earlier versions of the Bible that kind of mentioned that certain things died off during the flood, or they weren't able to make it onto the ark with Noah, unfortunately, which is always a little funny thing that shows up in some comic book someplace. But I think that there is a big question of the temporality of existence. And if you have a temporality of existence, I know this is a big circle going nowhere fast, but if you have kind of like, if God can exist at all times, then God can kind of exist in all places where all sorts of creatures can exist and manifest. So in the story that I'm working with, all sorts of things are appearing, but that's because God is in fact coming back to earth in the form of, well, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And it's going to cause all sorts of things. But one thing it's going to have to address is, there's all these different stories and all these different mythologies and all these different ideas of God origins and all sorts of creatures. And especially if you look at Judeo-Christian texts, heaven is full of all sorts of fantastical celestial beings, and just the cherubim, I could go on for hours and hours about. People envision them as these kind of like winged half lions or half eagles, and all sorts of
Multi-winged.
Well, even the description of angels themselves are something out of a Terence McKenna dream. You'd have to be on psychedelics to understand them. um it when we talk about fantastical creatures and religion, it gets into a lot of really murky areas, because these are things that people believe in, and these were things that people believed in at one point. Like, it's not just that someone had these stories about angels. People honestly believed at some point that they had experiences with angels. Like, the story of Daniel has a basis in the idea that at some point the early Jewish communities, even when they were polytheistic, were somehow running into these spirits out in the desert. And like, we have all these early stories, especially in archaeological texts, that there's this kind of ancient Jewish ritual where their rabbis would go out into the desert and essentially wrestle with angels, and they take this seriously. So you have to ask all these questions. Well, okay, if there is, especially in my urban fantasy universe, if there really are these creatures that exist, how are they existing in a world where we have the internet, YouTube, smartphones, satellites, global positioning devices, all sorts of things? The second thing is like, okay, how are they all existing in a way that, how can you have dragons and then have angels and then have zombies and then have creatures that defy the definition of what but in Japan they have this idea of a vampire that can disconnect its head and basically float from house to house and murder people. So like, that requires you having a belief system that kind of differentiates itself from Western theology. There's certain things in Eastern thought and spiritual practice that are unique to that make that work, that you can't just transfer into the West. So, when it comes to the question of dealing with religion, a lot of it is making up as I go, but at the same time, really trying to respect the textual sources, really trying to respect the primary sources. And of course, these are things that people believe. Like, there are still people that believe that the earth is 6,000 years old. Like, I have to respect them in a way and not turn them off by saying, well, you're wrong. How does that fit in to the reality of what we're dealing with every day? So, you know, and the question of creatures is a big can of worms that leads to all sorts of other things. Mm-hmm. And that's my time. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, Ginny. Okay,
this has been Jay's TED Talk, and
yes, you said that you had answered that question, and then I'm going to ask.
I mean, because I think if you're going to get down to it, most religion is made up, and so I can make up whatever the hell I want because it's all made up.
I have to disagree with that fundamentally. I have to.
See, I think that every human has something in them that makes them either look for a god or look for answers. But in my opinion, every religion is some form of made up. A human had to sit down there and describe what was going on. So, you know, Moses coming down with tablets, all this other stuff, all of that, and we can get into theology, but it's not this panel. So what I'm going to say is that
it's a good dodge.
No, it's a good. This is not that panel. I will talk this with you for hours at a con when we're together.
Absolutely.
It's not this panel. So in my Necropolis Enforcement Files series, the way I handle what Jay's saying, how do you say there are dragons? How do you say there are angels? There are planes of existence. And on those planes, that's where those creatures live. And can they intersect? Yes, there are convergence points. And some creatures can slide through the planes of existence easily. So the undead plane has vampires and werewolves. And yes, I know they're alive, but they fall in undead, and I give an answer. Okay, zombies, they're all on the undead plane. There's the demonic plane, and then there's the depths, which is where the Prince of Darkness, who is not Satan, lives. And rules, and then you've got the plane of the fantastic, which is the most terrifying. It's more terrifying in some ways than the depths, because that's where all the creatures of fantasy and nightmare go. So the angelic plane and the ethereal plane, you know, as one of my characters says, what would frighten an angel is truly terrifying to anybody else. So you can. Planes of Existence handles that, you know, handles your how do they all survive. So if we're going to say it's all real, or that we want to be able to prove it's all real, well, Planes of Existence. I mean, in my Alien series, I'm in a multiverse. We're in a multiverse. So, I mean, if you're going to take the belief that anything is possible, then anything is possible, including conflicting information at the same place.
Which is sort of quantum mechanics. Anything is possible.
Can I jump in there?
Yes, please.
I was going to say the other thing that, I mean, Peter S. Beagle did it brilliantly in The Last Unicorn. Back to unicorns, everybody.
Yeah.
I think the thing that gets missed in that book is how he plays with time. Okay, that these creatures are outside of time. And so when Ginny's talking about planes of existence, one of those is time. Like Althea can't, as she's in human form, can't, spoilers from a 50-year-old book, can't reach the Red Bull, speaking of magical creatures. From the castle, she has to go through the clock to do it. So she has to step outside of the time that she's in and pass on to something else. And the theme of time affecting magical creatures and how you can interact with them comes through in a lot of works. That's the one that leaped to mind. So I think we justify the beliefs or the mythology in a lot of ways as humans because we're trying to make sense of the world and call it religion, call it string theory. Was I reading something? I caught a headline the other day that now somebody's saying time doesn't exist, which I have to go find and read that. You know, so we're just trying to make sense of our world. And I think we also enjoy the idea that we might encounter something special and spectacular. I mean, look at all the TV shows about everybody hunting Sasquatch right now, right? There's like 40 TV shows on Sasquatch hunting. We want to discover the different, the special, the magical. We want to put that in our work. We want to read about it. And so I think that's core to our place in the world and how we make sense of it. So, a pupper.
I can just tag on to that. Peter S. Beagle's The Folk of the Air, which is a fantastic book that is not as well known, obviously. He's most known for The Unicorn, Fine and Private Place. But The Folk of the Air definitely deals with this component of planes and time, especially. I also want to say about the Sasquatch shows, there's good eating on those. And if I can cycle back to one other thing, I am now obsessed with the concept of angel wrestling, and is there Jello involved?
Yes. Yes. No, I'm not joking. Yes.
God, that's even worse.
There's textual evidence of an angelic substance that angels kind of excrete.
Oh, gee.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I want to know about that one.
I don't think I do either.
It's the same thing that
if I may, fantasy is also fantasy. We can talk about how things are grounded in myth and whatever, but ultimately it comes down to we are writers, we have imaginations, we make this up, and our ancestors had the same abilities that we do. I'm sure they made up a lot of things too. And with all due respect, Jay, I do respect you with your theological background and all, and
it's not a theological background.
Okay, but
religious studies, though.
Even so, we should be coming here as writers and talking about writing. I think we've digressed just a little bit.
But in a sense, yeah, we have digressed. But in a sense, A, panels are all about digressions, and B, in a weird way, I've been sitting here going, now we are getting into the core of what everyone is writing. Wow. And why they're writing it. And I think that's wonderful, because the question I was going to ask when things went in this very interesting digression was, what influenced you to create your fantastical creatures in the way that you did? That's where I was going. And basically what we got here was an insight into how everyone's minds work. Basically Jay going from textual, Gini dividing it into how do we allow this to happen, Paige addressing time, David addressing other things, and you're going in a different direction. So why don't I ask you that question, and Barbara Ann as well, what influenced your creatures? What set you on the path to create them the way you did?
That's funny that you drew the comparison with everybody said, because I do draw my inspiration from just sitting back and watching people, which is what I was doing for the conversation there. But I like to see hidden sides of people. I think that's what prompted me to make the creatures that I make.
Mm-hmm. Were you looking to do a deep dive into individual personalities? Were you basically manifesting personalities in your creatures? Is that, giving shape to those personalities that you saw?
I think more than that, it's about what people hide and what people present. And when they do this, like the side of yourself that you present to, say, your very close friends or very close family is completely different than the one you present to, say, a business colleague or someone, stranger you meet in the street. And I'm always interested in what's going on under the surface with people, like what they're thinking when they're doing this. Like if they're an excellent public speaker, but inside they're very panicky, and after everything is over, they're going to go cry in the bathroom for a while. True story. And so it's stuff like that, I think, that fascinates me. It's like, what are you hiding?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What would you, okay, Wendy, you dodged that question there.
Well, I didn't dodge anything. I didn't dodge anything. I just thought maybe the other person was the one you were talking to. No, I actually like to use creatures in my poetry a lot. just because I like what they symbolize. I like that a dragon has certain symbols in certain cultures, and I like to draw an image or an emotion that is more universally understood and use that for the impact in my poetry. I write a lot of micro poetry, and I need to make every word, every image count. And for me, using fantastical creatures like a unicorn or a dragon or whatever, because they are universal, they are really great symbols to use in short works. Not to say in a story I don't use them as a character, I do, but I'm mainly a poet these days, and that's my main use for fantastical creatures.
So it's sort of a shorthand and symbolic at the same time?
Well, yes. Yeah. Well, I write sci-fi coup and fantasy coup, and these are forms of haiku. And I only get 3 lines in my poems.
Yeah,
and I have to make everything count. And I have to work in a concept of time. I have to work in a concept of place and an emotion. And I have to do it all in a very, very compact form. And I'm known for that. For some reason, this form just appeals to me. But that's why I like to use universal concepts, because I can pack a bigger punch with a smaller number of words. And I say these creatures are really good for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and you know, archetypes are archetypes, tropes. They all exist for a reason. They're things that we have learned to hold on to. So, you know, Ginny, your critters, are they symbols? Are they archetypes? Are they characters in themselves?
Well, they're characters in themselves. And in the Acropolis Enforcement File series, the reason I wrote it and am writing it is because it really bothered me that pretty much every undead comes out of religion. And we've shoved God away from them. We shoved them away from the religion. Golems come out of Judaism, vampires, and werewolves come out of Catholicism, and so forth. And we've just pretended it doesn't exist anymore. There's a reason why a cross is supposed to affect a vampire, and it's because it's coming out of Catholicism. And the cross has significance. And I also thought it was wrong to basically say, well, a werewolf bit you or a vampire bit you, so now you're evil. My take is that the characters get to choose. When they undie, they either pledge their soul to the gods and monsters, or they pledge for the prince. And if they're on with the gods and monsters, they're on the side of good, and if they're the prince, they're on the side of evil. And it's a constant fight of the good guys trying to avert Armageddon, which the prince's side is always trying to bring back. So it just bothered me that these can't come out of religions and deeply held beliefs, and then we're pretending that they're just sexy vampires. So that was my reaction to it. And I like it. I like the fact that I have good vampires, bad vampires, good demons. There are altar demons who are good. So I enjoy that. And anyone who shows up is a character in their own right. I'm not heavy into symbolism. I'm wordy, so I don't need to be. Unlike Wendy, who's writing wonderful, exquisite haikus, I'm writing really long novels, so I don't need symbols. I can write 3 pages on that, you know.
And that's okay, Ginny.
Yes, right. So I don't use a lot of symbolism. I have it in there. I'll have some stuff, you know, hidden if you're really paying attention. But that's sort of like the underlying, on your 12th read through, you finally, oh, that's what she meant by that. But for the most part, no, they're characters in their own right, doing things in their own right to further whatever cause they are behind. The Poofs in the Alien series have their own autonomy. They have their own free will. Free will is a gigantic thing in the Alien series, and they have the choice on whether or not they kind of pick who they belong to. And they choose when they're going, you know, as Kitty calls it, large and in charge, and when they're just cute little bundles of fluff. So everything's got its own autonomy, because if I feel like if it's got sentience somewhere in there, it's got autonomy, even if it's just a little bit.
Okay. David, what about you? Symbols, archetypes, metaphors, or characters?
I basically use what I think is fun, which I know is like such a ridiculous.
That's valid. There are no wrong answers.
I try to look at what hasn't been done before. I try to find new twists. I did one of my degrees is ancient history, the other is literature, and so I do try to work with tropes or archetypes. I try to work with historical ideas. There are, of course, we've talked a lot about historical inspiration in this conversation, but there are historical fantasies. There are books that were written that were very fantastic and deal with creatures and idea like backwards feet. Or if you look particularly at China was writing what we would call fantasy literature hundreds and hundreds of years before the West was. So there's so much out there to play with. I do try to be mindful of cultural appropriation. I do try to be mindful of for example, I recently had a reviewer ask, why is he using elves? Why is he using leprechauns? Why is he using these Western European creatures? Why he's American? Why isn't he using more American, Native American myth or folklore? And well, I am not Native American. I'm not going to lean onto that because it's not my cultural heritage. Whereas, my family is very Greek, it is very Welsh. So I do have that side of things to kind of pull on. But I mostly I love what Gail Carriger said on this topic, where someone asked in her more recent werewolf books, when are you going to have a vampire? She's like, when I need one. That's exactly how my brain works, is I'll pull in what I want to when I need it. I try to take a more playful, and I try not to write myself into a corner. It's the same as my magic. If I sit down and paint in all the corners and rules about how my magic works, then I don't have any room for leeway. And Jean Marie and I were just on a panel earlier, which was very fun because we started talking about vampires, Ginny. And what was interesting was, I think almost every author on that panel who wrote about vampires had an experience of a reader coming to them and saying, no, that's not how vampires work. That's not how they really are. Like a very strong belief and ethos about what a vampire is. And my friend Greg Heron said it really well when he was trying to write a vampire book. And he's like, I don't know what to do with this. And his editor's like, there's so much I have to read and study. And his editor's like, they're made up, right? Just kind of tying back to what Wendy was saying. I think that one of the beauties of all of this is there might be historical examples, there might be historical influence, but we can, as Wendy said, we can take that and we can play with it. And I do find it really interesting when somebody gets very attached to an idea of how a vampire works, or how a dragon works, or how a unicorn works, and then they get they get those emails like, "How dare you do that with unicorn?"
I was attacked online for saying werewolves were undead, which was why earlier I said they're undead because they choose. That's where they're going. But I actually was attacked by people because werewolves are alive. Like, they're not real. So I can say whatever they are. But people are very, very attached to whatever section of whatever myth they've chosen to believe in. And by gosh, you better not change it. If you do, you better have an explanation. And I actually made sure I hadn't finished the first book when I got attacked because I was talking about it. And I just went in and I'm just going to add a couple sentences right here, and that should handle that. So, yeah.
Okay. Paige, archetype, trope, metaphor, symbol, character. What about the creatures in yours? All of that, all of the above, huh? What was all of the above?
Yeah, well, I'm a character-driven writer. I'm a character-driven reader, so everybody's always going to be a character. But I was introduced to archetypes by a high school English teacher, Lucia Owen, who taught us about archetypes by wheeling the silver cart in with the TV on it. You remember those? and playing original Star Trek so that we could talk about archetypes. So I can't seem to separate it all. But I also have an issue with some of the tropes as they pertain to gender specifically. Everything for me comes down on a very feminist slant. And so for me, it's, okay, what if we're all told these stories in a cultural context? And they're all wrong. They're all wrong. Something else is going on. And so this whole series behind me kind of deals with that. And I wrote a short story for the book. I think you did the intro to it, Jean Marie. The Witches, Warriors, and Wise Women.
Yes, I did do the intro for that.
Where I took the Jersey Devil and I put the Jersey Devil in Tucson at a gem show with his witch guardian. Mm-hmm. So because it always bothers me, like it bothers Ginny somewhat, I think, that all these creatures are seen as so often as a negative, as as evil, as bad, as destructive, but they're just doing their thing, especially if they've been around longer than we have. You know, they're just being what they are. They are what they have always been in the context of their existence. And so when you encounter the other, so this is where it gets into the symbolism. When you encounter the other, you have a choice to make about what you do with that information. Do you fear it? Do you accept it? Do you explore it? All these things. And I like to play with these creatures on that level, but they're always also characters in their own right.
Okay, great. Jay, archetype, trope, symbol, metaphor, character. The creatures in your work.
You're on mute. You're on mute, Jay.
Thank you. Always a character. To a certain extent, there's always some sort of symbolism. I think every character carries a story behind them. But, you know, they show up, as I think someone said, they have to show up and do what they do for the sake of the story and the narrative. As much as I try to keep my creatures and my characters culturally respectful from the places that they're supposed to originate from, to a certain extent, at some point that has to be put aside, so, you know, we can get from point A to point B, and then, you know, get people to the end of these books. So yeah, they're always characters first and foremost.
Okay. Barbara Ann, characters, tropes, archetypes, metaphor, symbol.
Always characters. If there's metaphors and things, I always say it happens kind of accidentally for me. I mean, I definitely have themes in my books, but I have a background in anthropology, so I like to build societies, and then I have a character, and if there's something about them that makes them different from everybody else, if they're part monster or whatever, then I try to figure out how that would shape their place in society, if it's hidden or not, and then how the society they grew up in would react to them.
Okay, great. Great. All right, we're going to have a lightning round, and then we're going to go into our closing. And the lightning round is, which is the writer you think really, really worked well with fantastical creatures, including unicorns? So, Barbara Ann?
Meredith Ann Pierce will always be my favorite writer about unicorns. She wrote the Firebringer trilogy, and I read the first one when I was like 9. So she holds the top place, at least for unicorn craftsmanship in my world.
Okay. Jay?
Oh, God, I don't know. Probably Peter S. Beagle. The Last Unicorn really is a great use of the trope and of the creature. So, yeah, Peter S. Beagle.
Yep. Paige?
Janny Wirtz in her Wars of Light and Shadow series, where she has dragons that their dreams can disrupt like physical reality. Yeah, super cool.
Dreaming gods, as it were. Yes. David?
I am so stumped on this, and I hate to say that. I love the way that Gail Carriger handles the supernatural beings, because she comes at it from a very scientific mindset. So she really breaks down some of the old Victorian science of the ideas, the concept of soul as measurable. I think that I just love her books in general, so I'm highly biased there.
Okay.
Le Guin was mentioned. I think Le Guin, I loved Le Guin's take on dragons and creatures and the way that the world worked as an ecosystem. But yeah, I feel so weirdly stumped by this question because I like all these names are coming through my brain, but I'm like, no, not quite. So
There are no wrong answers. Wendy, what about you? Who do you think does it well?
Well, to be honest with the unicorn, it is Peter S. Beagle. He's on the A list when it comes to that. But I do love the way Annie McCaffrey worked in dragons, and she had an Akora, a unicorn human kind of character too in one of her books. It's not really one of my favorites, but as always, she always handles her subjects very well, and I'm sure it can be recommended.
Okay, great. And Ginny, what about you? Who, other than the yourself and of the people on this panel, this is always an assumption.
Right. Terry Pratchett's Discworld. There's nothing he didn't create that wasn't splendiferous. So, and I love his take on everything, particularly witches, and his take on dragons. I'm sure there's a unicorn in there I'm forgetting, but I don't care because it's Pratchett for me all the way, always.
Jenny, you're right about that because he does such a good job of using like goblins as a class metaphor and the way that he twists gender with dwarves and
everything. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. A brilliant mind, taken from us too soon, I'm afraid. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Now we're going to the final question, which we always ask. What is your current book and where can folks find you on the web? Ginny?
You can find me at GiniKoch.com. I'm on Facebook in a variety of ways. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Pinterest. I have a newsletter you can sign up for. Hook me up. And my newest releases right now are all anthologies. And maybe one day the physical books will show up. But
One day.
One day. The Reinvented Heart ebook has dropped. The physical books are coming. Silence in the City and Gunfight on Europa Station both finally have physical books. And Predator Eyes of the Demon was supposed to release in June, and we're now just hoping, good gosh, oh golly my, sometime in 2022. So those are out and upcoming.
Okay, well, I'll keep my fingers crossed. Jay?
So my latest release is A Wave of Lions, Salt Songs of the Mirror Sea by Falstaff Books. You can also find me at jrequard.com or at Twitter at jrequard. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you. Wendy, most recent release and where folks can find you on the web.
My most recent release is Eccentric Orbits. I am the editor of a poetry anthology of speculative poetry. I will say I am so honored of the poets that submitted for this anthology. I would say a majority of the top names of contemporary speculative poets are in this book. And again, I'm very grateful. I'm very touched that they would entrust me with their work. It's an excellent book. If you've ever been curious about speculative poetry, I highly recommend you give my anthology a try. It will really open your eyes to what is possible in poetry. To find me, I do have a new website, wendyvancamp.com, where you can read about my credits. I'm now a new poet laureate, and you'll have more of that on the website coming up. Or you can find me on my old website, which is nowastedink.com, which is my writing blog for readers and writers of science fiction and fantasy. We have book reviews, I have author interviews, all kinds of things on there. Instagram, again, No Wasted Ink. Twitter, W Van Camp. But just go to one of my websites and all the links to my social media are there. And we'll make it simple.
Great. David.
Let me think. So, brain's not working very great today. But my first book, White Trash Warlock, its sequel, Trailer Park Trickster, they're both out from Blackstone Publishing. The third book in the series, Deadbeat Druid, is out in October, so that's coming soon. My other titles I mentioned earlier will be out next year. The easiest place to find me is davidslayton.com. You can sign up for my newsletter there. All of my social media handles are on that site as well. I'm most active on Twitter when it comes to interacting with readers right now. But if you do Google me or look for it, just remember the R, davidslayton.com. There are a lot more David Slaytons in the world than I knew when I first started writing, including a few sketchy Florida man types. So don't forget the R.
Okay, great. Barbara Ann, most recent release and where folks can find you on the web.
My two most recent releases are the first two books in the Sisters of Sarah's trilogy, The Noble and the Nightingale and The Scout and the Scoundrel. And then the third book will be out in October. You can find me everywhere in the web. The books are available through any bookstore. I hang out on Twitter a lot too, retweeting both David and Wendy. And so you could just get us all there at one time and save yourself some trouble.
Great. Okay. And so no website?
I do have a website. I barely touch it though. I'm kind of ashamed with how little attention I've given it. It is barbaraannwright.com.
Okay, that's fair enough. And Paige?
I'm Paige L. Christie everywhere. And again, don't forget the L or you'll end up with a very famous swimmer. And the L is there for me because I have two first names and people reverse them all the time. But Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, my website, paigelchristie.com. I'm Paige L. Christie everywhere. My latest release is the short story, The Mercy of the Lorn, in the 2022 Jordan Con anthology, which I believe the title is Neither Beginnings Nor Endings. Very cool book. It's 10 stories and 10 color art plates from artists who attend Jordan Con as well. So it's a very unusual
wonderful
anthology. It's fabulous. I just have a hard copy, but it's still in my suitcase because I just got back from Jordan Con. The thing that I'm most excited about is the fourth and final book in this trilogy behind me, well, soon to be quadrilogy, is Stormforge, and it just went to beta. So I'm very excited that that will be out this fall if all goes as planned. It's only 2.5 years late for reasons. So very excited about that. So keep an eye out for it if you're interested at all in this series.
Okay, well, hey, there was a lot that went late in the last 2.5 years. Things that shall not be named, but we shall name ConTinual, the convention that has programming for you anytime you want. So with that, I want to thank you all for being a great panel and taking this in some really interesting directions. And thank you all out there for joining us here at ConTinual.